distinguished dignitaries on the dais, Shri Anil Razdan, Shri Ajay Sharma, Shri Manoj Kumar, and Shri Ajay Yadav. Dear audience, very good morning to all of you. At the outset, let me thank ICC for this wonderful opportunity. Now, as threat of climate change is becoming a reality, there is a lot of pressure to accelerate energy transition from fossil fuel-based economy to renewable energy economy. And while this is happening, I think green hydrogen has become kind of a buzzword. And this is in spite of the fact that if you see globally, green hydrogen is just 1% of the total hydrogen used. So naturally the question is, why is green hydrogen so important? And what are the real impediments in accelerating the usage of green hydrogen? And if there are impediments, then what are the solutions? So in next 10 minutes or so, I would like to focus on these points. But before that, I just want to tell very briefly about the company I represent, which is Tata Cleantech Capital. So Tata Cleantech Capital is the joint venture between Tata Group and IFC Washington. And we started our journey 10 years back. We are the first private sector green investment bank in emerging economies. And our focus is on climate finance and advisory services. We are essentially into project finance, debt syndication, and advisory services. As part of our climate finance journey, we look at various sectors, including sectors like wind, solar, water treatment, small hydro, biomass, and so on and so forth. Since our inception, we have funded about 350 clean tech projects. The aggregate renewable capacity we have funded is close to about 13 gigawatts. And this 13 gigawatts mitigate about 20.2 million tons of carbon emissions every year. Since our inception, we have disbursed to industry about 25,000 crores. And our current asset book is close to 11,000 crores. So this is about Tata Cleantech Capital. Now coming back to our key topic. As we discussed, decarbonization is not an option now, it is a necessity. Now when we talk about decarbonization, essentially there are three sectors which we have to address. Electricity, which is around 60% of the carbon emissions, then transportation, which is around 20%, and finally the industry, which is around 10%. So this is about 90%. Now when we talk about electricity, essentially we are talking about growth of wind and solar. Now wind and solar is a great story, but we have to remember that wind and solar does not give us power when we actually need it. It gives power when the resources are there. And today, India's total capacity of renewable, meaning only solar and wind, is about 25% of the total capacity. So penetration is 25%. And world over, we have seen that if the penetration goes beyond 30% or so, then the grid becomes unstable. The reason is, of course, that solar and wind, the generation peaks during the noon time. And noon time, the generation is so much that that power cannot be used. So naturally, we are talking about storage of power. And when we take India, while today we are at 110 gigawatts of solar and wind, our ambition is to go to 435 gigawatts of solar and wind in next 7 years. So naturally, this will make grid quite unstable unless we have a storage solutions. And when we talk about storage, we have three options. One is the pumped hydro, which is a great option. But then it is constrained by how much we can do because it depends upon the sites. And the projects takes about 4 to 5 years to get commissioned. And we have only 7 years. Then we also talk about battery. Battery is a great story. But then we have to remember the fact that battery requires a lot of imports. And if we focus too much on batteries, then we will just be replacing fossil fuel imports by the battery imports. So naturally, the third segment which is left is green hydrogen. And if we really have to scale up renewable energy, then we don't have a choice but to focus on green hydrogen. So this is one part. The other part is coming to the industry. Now today the industry needs a lot of energy for heating purposes. And in fact, all this energy comes from the fossil fuels. Electrification is not a solution for replacement of this energy, because if we try to electrify through renewable energy, then that renewable energy, as I told you, is infirm. It will give energy only when there are resources. At the same time, industry also emits a lot of carbon because of the chemical processes. If you take steel industry, in the process of reduction of iron oxide, carbon dioxide is emitted. If you take cement industry, in the whole process of making clinker from limestone, a lot of CO2 is emitted. So industry contributes significantly to emissions. And in this segment, there is no other choice but to use green hydrogen. No other choice. Lastly, let's come to transportation. Now in transportation, we do have an alternative, which is electric vehicles. And electric vehicles are doing well. Today, if you see the segments like two-wheelers, three-wheelers, and even electric buses, the total cost of ownership is lower than the cost of ICE vehicles. It's a different matter that the capital cost is high, but the total cost of ownership is low. So in transportation, we do have an option, but that also has significant limitations. The key limitation, as I told earlier, is that one has to import battery components. Second limitation is that today, when you charge electric vehicles, you have to spend hours. And there's always this anxiety that if the battery is discharged, then what happens in the middle of the road? So this is not a complete solution. Then finally, if you take batteries, the key issue is waste management. Today when we talk about sustainable economy, sustainability to a great extent will come from circularity, from being able to use the waste. But when it comes to battery, recycling is difficult, and there is no formal sector for handling e-waste. Given all this reality, while electric vehicle is a good option, but then it has its limitations. And it has a major limitation when it comes to the long-haul transportation and the heavy-duty transportation, like say shipping or like say heavy-duty trucks. So the fact today is that whether you take electricity or you take industry or you take transportation, there is no choice but to depend upon green hydrogen. And in fact, if this sector doesn't develop, then this whole story of energy transition will go fat. Now, question to be answered is, when green hydrogen is so important, then what are the challenges? Of course, the key challenge, as was told by our Honorable Secretary as well, is the cost. Today, green hydrogen, the cost is as high as 300 to 350 rupees, as against grey hydrogen, which is made from natural gas, which is around, say, 120 or 130 rupees. So there's a huge green premium. Plus, when we talk about green hydrogen, we have to store green hydrogen, and storage of green hydrogen and transportation of green hydrogen is not easy. So what can be done? Now the good news here is that if you go back about a decade or so, solar and wind had a similar story. The cost of solar power per unit was as high as 20 rupees. And today it is 2.5 rupees. Similarly, wind was close to about 8 to 10 rupees, and today it is about 3 rupees. So we have seen that clearly, once all of us, the humanity starts focusing on something, the costs come down because the technology progresses, because economies of scale comes in, and eventually they become viable. So when we talk about green hydrogen, there are two things we have to do. One is, how can we reduce green premium? Today it is said that reduction of the green premium will take about 1 to 2 decades. How can we reduce that 2 decades to, say, 5 years or 10 years? Secondly, while the green premium is being addressed, how do we build a business case so that even though green hydrogen is expensive, even then people start investing in that? Fortunately, we have found this solution in a number of other industries. And I'm sure the way government is focusing on it through the National Green Hydrogen Mission, that will be a possibility. Now, to make this happen, based on our experience, we have certain suggestions, and I would like to talk about those suggestions. First is, it is very important to remember that even today, India uses a lot of hydrogen, and that hydrogen is used by the fertilizer industry and the refinery industry. In fact, today, India is the largest importer of grey hydrogen in the world, grey ammonia. Plus, India is also the third largest grey hydrogen producer in the world. So already we have a huge captive requirement. And that requirement is coming through industries like fertilizer, oil refinery, as I told you. And that requirement is as high as 6.7 million tons per annum. As our Honorable Secretary said, our mission is targeting 5 million tons per annum by 2030. And already today, we have a requirement of 6.7 million tons per annum from the industry. The point to note is that this requirement will go up significantly. If India grows at the rate of 6 to 7% per annum, then these industries will grow at least at the rate of 10% per annum. So every 7 years, this requirement will actually double by the rule of 72. So by 2050, actually, the situation would be that almost 80% of the green hydrogen we need will be from the industry, which are already using green hydrogen. And whatever big things I spoke about for the requirement of other sectors like electricity, transportation, etc., will contribute only 20 to 30%. So given this reality, I think the most important thing is that we need to address the low-hanging fruit, which is basically replacing our grey hydrogen with green hydrogen through proper blending. And this could be possible by creating hydrogen hubs. What can be done is that in order to take care of the need for transportation and storage, we could have hydrogen hubs near the industries like fertilizer industry, refinery industry, steel industry, where we could have electrolyzers producing green hydrogen, and they could be used for the heating purposes of these industries. Of course, this will require renewable energy, but renewable energy can be produced anywhere, and then it can be transported through open access. So if we focus on creating hydrogen hubs, then I think we can address low-hanging fruits. The hydrogen produced from these hydrogen hubs could be blended with the grey hydrogen, and eventually as the cost comes down, which always happens as the focus goes into the sector, then the requirement of blending could be increased. I think this is one very practical solution and pretty much doable. Second thing we have to remember is that when we are talking about addressing the hydrogen requirement of industry, we are actually talking about huge requirements. When Secretary told about the requirement of 125 gigawatts, we have to remember that today, after 8-9 years of effort, we have built only 110 gigawatts of renewable energy, meaning solar and wind. And 5 million tons per annum itself will take about 125 gigawatts. Other statistics are that the requirement of energy per se is 250 billion units, which is about 17% of India's requirement. And today when I spoke about the 110 gigawatts, that generates only 11.5% of India's requirement of electricity. So clearly we are talking about huge requirement of solar and wind, and we don't have a choice but to remove all the impediments and ensure that we significantly enhance our production of this energy per annum. Today India develops about 15 gigawatts of solar and wind per annum. If we have to go to 435 gigawatts, we'll need to increase this to 40 gigawatts. And just to quote some statistics, China does 83 gigawatts per annum, or almost 90 gigawatts, and India is doing 15 gigawatts. So we have a huge room to catch up. And whatever are the impediments there, like the requirement of land acquisition or the policy consistency, that needs to be improved. Finally, we have had a great story in solar and wind. And today the country is one of the preferred places by so many investors, including sovereign wealth funds, including global utilities, to come to India and start developing plants of solar and wind. But then in this segment, we have had various experiences. And it will be important for us to learn from those experiences so that we don't repeat the same mistake. I think first thing we have to learn is that as we go deep into green hydrogen, is that we need a strong payment security mechanism. If you see the solar sector, before SECI was there, SECI acts as a counterparty which purchases the power from the developers. And before SECI was there, the growth of this segment was very slow. And only after SECI came in, suddenly the cost of solar came down significantly from 8-9 rupees to 4 rupees and then finally 2 rupees. That was because there was a payment security mechanism. The developers were sure that if they supply energy, they will get paid in time. They were not so comfortable when the power was being supplied to certain state governments. And in fact, unfortunately, there was even renegement of contracts, as you all are aware. So this is something which we will have to avoid as we scale up green hydrogen. Other is that our bidding methodology will have to be more practical. If we see the story of solar and wind, today we follow reverse auctions. But what happens is that every year there are huge auctions. And those are speculative auctions. But if you see on ground, the number of projects which come are much less. The reason, as I told you, these auctions are speculative because they rely on the fact that the cost of inputs will come down. Sometimes the cost of inputs come down, sometimes they don't. So a lot of auctions we are doing, but projects are not coming on ground. So we need to kind of correct it. Other is that while we have made huge progress in terms of generation of solar and wind, but then we still don't have a proper manufacturing ecosystem. And we have relied on imports for everything, practically starting from solar modules to all the other balance of material which are required for the production of solar and wind. Of course, in wind we do have turbines. I think it will be important to create proper manufacturing ecosystem comprising electrolyzer and comprising solar equipments so that we don't rely on imports and so that we don't create any geopolitical problems for ourselves. Lastly, policy consistency is extremely important. I spoke about ease of land acquisition. There are other issues as well. In solar we have seen that while government was doing a great job in terms of the ALMM and in terms of the PLI scheme, but somehow this were not properly chronicled. So what happened was that there were phases when the developers were not having solar modules. I think these kind of issues we need to avoid. And I'm very sure that if we are able to learn from some of our experience in solar and wind, with the kind of support which government is providing to green hydrogen, we will definitely solve our dream of having green hydrogen and India becoming the exporter of green hydrogen. Thank you.
Chourasia for an excellent presentation. Very practical, and being a man from financing, he knows that he has got to feel his onions before he banks them. And I think this is what, as you see, the need, that there is a need for growth of business, but need for good business, sound business. Anybody can fall foul because of circumstances. That failure rate is there. We should never be afraid of it. But it should be built on sound principles and a sound understanding of the problem and issue. And I think that's what any financer looks forward to. I'm so glad that you had identified the things. But the key thing, you see, we get carried away by this gigawatt story. What you ultimately need is electrons. And you made that point of 11%. I think it could even be lower. So we've got to keep that in mind, that ultimately what you need is electrons.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your kind words.
Thank you very much, sir, for the excellent presentation. Shri Ajay Yadav ji could not be present for the entire conclave today, but he has asked for the proceedings, so it will be sent to the MNRE. Now may I request Mr. Ajay Sharma, Secretary General, SMEV, to kindly address us. Thank you.
A very good morning to all. And my work has become a bit more challenging now because after such a impressive presentation made by Sri Chourasia, I have to do a bit better to, to impress all of you. So once again, a very good morning to all of you. And on the dais, we have Sri Anil Razdan, Honorable Chairman, ICC Expert Committee on Energy, Sri Manoj Kumar, Special Chief Resident Commissioner, Government of Tripura. We also had Sri Ajay Yadav, Joint Secretary, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy. And of course, we have Mr. Manish Chourasia, Managing Director of Tata Clean Tech. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Society of Manufacturers of Electric Vehicles, whom I represent today, we congratulate the Indian Chamber of Commerce for organizing the Green Hydrogen Conclave 2023. It is so topical and so timely. We also thank the ICC for inviting us to this meaningful conclave. Ladies and gentlemen, Indians from across the world are witnessing as our Honorable Prime Minister is on his historic visit to the United States. And I'm sure that every Indian is proud of our Honorable Prime Minister as he goes on to address the joint session of the US Congress for the second time, an honor only achieved by very few global leaders in the past. Yesterday, in his statement, Honorable Prime Minister did mention about the India-US shared vision on clean energy transition, which covers green hydrogen and battery storage, amongst others. On this historic occasion, can we all have a round of applause for our Honorable Prime Minister, Shri Narendra Modi ji, for his vision, his exemplary and unparalleled contribution made towards our nation building in the last 9 years. Ladies and gentlemen, green hydrogen is arguably a prominent development to emerge from the economic and geopolitical chaos of 2022-2023. Despite the considerable uncertainty caused by these upheavals, green hydrogen saw a new investment commitment of US $70 billion, primarily in the European Union. Globally, around 680 large-scale projects proposals worth US $240 billion have been put forward, which reflects the economic opportunity and strategic importance of green hydrogen. India has set its sight on becoming energy independent by 2047 and achieving net zero by 2070. To achieve this target, increasing renewable energy use across all economic spheres is central to India's energy transition, and green hydrogen is considered a promising alternative for enabling this transition. Addressing the nation on the 75th Independence Day, our Honorable Prime Minister announced the National Hydrogen Mission with an aim of making India a hub for the production and export of green hydrogen. India is at a crucial juncture in the terms of its energy landscape, and green hydrogen has a critical role to play to make the nation self-reliant and energy independent. In March 2023, Honorable Union Minister Shri Nitin Gadkari launched world's most advanced technology, developed green hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicle, first of its kind in India, which aims to create a green hydrogen-based ecosystem in the country. It is an important initiative which will promote clean energy and environmental protection by reducing dependence on fossil fuels and thereby make India energy self-reliant by 2047. Ambassador of Sudan. Yes, sir. So, ladies and gentlemen, we also have the privilege of having His Excellency Ambassador of Sudan with us on the dais. Can we have a round of applause for him also? Welcome to the conclave, Excellency. Ladies and gentlemen, India's advantage in green hydrogen space lies in the low-cost production of renewable energy, as already mentioned by some of our previous speakers. India must unleash multiple levers to make this hope a reality. Firstly is the deployment of funds. Tata Capital is here with us, as financial incentives for electrolyzer and green hydrogen production under the Green Hydrogen Mission. Secondly, creating a supportive policy framework. Green hydrogen gas blending and green hydrogen purchase obligations by industries could accelerate investments in the space. Thirdly, setting standards and rules and aligning Indian green hydrogen program with potential export market and their standards. And lastly, it's about the mode of export and its techno-commercial impacts. The mode of export will define the choice of infrastructure and significantly influence the cost of delivered green hydrogen. Ladies and gentlemen, renewables have been torchbearers of the green initiative since the beginning of the 21st century. Hydrogen can play the same role by the mid-century as the goalpost of going green shifts from merely reducing greenhouse gas emissions to achieving net zero emissions. The success of government initiative lies in administering the right mix of intra and intersectoral policies. It is undoubtedly clear that policymakers' decisions today will have a long-lasting impact on the country's energy story. The wish and the will by the government, in conjunction with stable and sustained policies, will ensure an expedited as well as smooth transition towards the green hydrogen ecosystem. India's policy announcements will set the context for the role of hydrogen in its energy